people talking about these days in crypto? Well, before today, are you ready? Silver. Everybody wants to talk about silver, obviously, because silver's going up and crypto just sits here. Now, is crypto sitting here bullish or bearish? Honestly, Bitcoin sitting still, kind of like your phone's broken. Like, wow, is this real? Worries me a little. Okay, that said, worry in Bitcoin has triggered like a baby alt season, a sector-based alt season, which, to be honest with you, has been a theme in the YouTube member area for well over a year, by the way. And today we have two of our coins. One of our coins we pounded the table on, Render, up 14%, and Monero is breaking out. Why is Monero breaking out? Well, why does anything break out? Because no one likes it, no one owns it, and no one knows how to buy it. I mean, in the US, Monero is only available on Kraken. And I have a feeling people are going to start figuring that out real quick because Skynet is coming and everybody got long Zcash, which is understandable. I still love Zcash, especially at a 300 handle, which again, you know, that was a prediction in the YouTube member area last week. Don't pay the 400s, pay the 300s. And then all of a sudden Monero takes off. It is a sector-based market, and it isn't even a sector-based market. It's specific coins in the sector. And you're like, yeah, Bill, I realize that. My screens work. Now, in the YouTube member area later, right after this, we're going to be going into like what coins are moving and what could be next. You know, DePIN, AI, and Bitcoin will change everything. Now, recently, thought leaders have come out and made a point that 90K Bitcoin and having Bitcoin sit still is not all that bad. Why? Because you have time to get in. You have time to say, all right, what stage are we in this market? Okay, I think we're in like the basing stage, right? There was the October 10th give up. Then there was exhaustion at the end of the year. Now it maybe feels like a little bit of cleansing and the base has begun. Base building, Solana, XRP, all these big cap coins are going through a cleansing and a basing process. That's the positive way of looking at what's going on. Now, let's talk about something radical. What breaks crypto out of this like doldrum? Like, we know something's going to happen in February. There's an eclipse. There's a Fed meeting. The Magnificent Seven starts earnings on the 27th with Meta, and it ends at the end of February with NVIDIA. So something will happen in the month of September. Excuse me. Something will happen in the month of February. And in some ways, I think the market is scared of that already, to be honest. But let's think of something constructive. Silver has reflected monetary debasement, even though there's a physical usage story there. Nobody knows what happens if Japan and their bond market actually just completely fall apart. No one knows. That creates uncertainty. But when, you know, some kind of climactic event happens there, it does provide certainty. It does. Even though everyone's talking about the unwind of the yen carry trade, it hasn't impacted anybody, mainly because the yen continues to fall. Right? If you borrow yen, or if you borrow yen and then sell it for dollars and the yen falls, your dollars are more powerful when you go to trade them in. So everybody's trying to tell you, oh my God, the yen carry trade. Oh my God, February. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. So Is there a positive surprise in crypto? Yes, the answer is, of course, yes, there is. And I'm going to tell you what it is. 600,000 Bitcoin from Venezuela is coming our way, along with all their oil and all their silver. All this talk about Greenland is a diversion. They're taking the wealth of that country. That's what they're doing. Now, the next thing they're going to do with the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve after they add Venezuela's Bitcoin is they're going to offer incentives to Bitcoin miners to help stabilize power grids. They're going to give them, the government is going to do state-sponsored capitalism. They're going to give them money to expand their data centers, to expand their computer facilities to allow for AI processing. And they're going to subsidize the infrastructure to build that because, again, Bitcoin miners can consume electricity and produce power. Sometimes they can, raise their level of power consumption, and then let it fall when demand falls. So I think the AI data center build out could involve Bitcoin miners. And if there was ever a subsidy for Bitcoin miners from Uncle Sugar to expand their data center capability, they would not have to sell Bitcoin to fund themselves if Uncle Sugar gave them money. Now, undoubtedly, you've listened to this thing about the government subsidizing Bitcoin miners to help produce Bitcoin, to help AI with data centers, and you're like, Bill, you're crazy. And I would just simply remind you that I have seen pictures of Eric Trump at their Bitcoin mining facility. So the family business is into mining. And I'm just wondering if somewhere in here, there's either a strategic reserve catalyst or there's an investment and an executive order for data centers or to subsidize miners to produce more Bitcoin. The Chinese and the Russians own gold and silver. We own Bitcoin. Now, privacy picking up as a narrative. The Monero move is going to focus everybody on the smaller privacy coins. Dusk, Secret, even Zcash. Galaxy Digital said total privacy coin market cap could be as high as 100 billion at the end of the year. Right now, I don't even think it's 20. Just for sake of reference. Now, if you want a more concrete story on Bitcoin, we're saying that Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ETF in blue mirrors what Meta did when it went public as Facebook. And, this little homemade pattern match thing says maybe you got a month before something big happens in Bitcoin, just the way something big happened in Meta after they all got done selling. So just keep in mind, things like the ETF, at least in the minds of stock people, are cheap. They look at it as cheap. They look at it sitting there. We look at it sitting there and go, wow, number doesn't go up. And we get nervous. It makes me nervous. And then, you have VanEck come out with this, right? You have guys talking about 2.9 million for Toby's year of 2050. They must watch the show. Seriously. Toby always gets on the show and says, hi, I'm from 2050. VanEck is like, yeah, it's 2.9 million and then for Bitcoin. And then they've got some sort of like wild upside case where it goes, some crazy number like 50 million. That is being seen by mutual funds. Let me tell you how they write research at Wall Street. Let me just, you know what? I didn't realize this. I'm on a visit. I'm walking on the streets of Hong Kong with a bunch of analysts from Goldman. And one guy looks at me and says, you know what? The best way to write research at Wall Street is to call up every genius client, every single genius client, and figure out what they're saying, and then compile that into a report and have that be your research because they know better than you do. And I was like, wow, that's a genius strategy. Now, in this case, with no hedge funds to call, a lot of times we're looking at what's moving. Notice Render is moving, right? Render and this like GPU shortage. Like I said something last week on the YouTube member podcast and probably on this show that Render was the next NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA goes up because there's no limit to how much processing power is needed. Okay, Akash, Render, TAO, all these like core AI coins that we just can't stop talking about are mooning. Everyone's talking about the Bank of Japan, and I want to talk about AI in crypto. Because, again, we're so traumatized by last year, so traumatized that we can't think straight. People aren't thinking straight in crypto. Now, a guy who is thinking straight is Michael Saylor. Okay, he just puts another dot on his graph. I saw that today. And he's announcing buying more Bitcoin because, Venezuela can't have more Bitcoin than him. Okay. And in many ways, he is the U.S. strategic reserve in many ways because, he's a U.S. company and he's on the nation's balance sheet. I don't think future demand for Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin as code, as a network that cannot be replicated by some chatbot is factored into this market at all. At all. And when that happens, you could have a volcanic move. Now, how do you know that? Well, because if you look at what's going on in these altcoins popping off one at a time, right? Last year, Zcash, this year, Monero, Render, whatever. You've heard this. Now, what eventually happens is people start looking at Zcash, Monero, Render, and whatever else pops off as leading indicators. In other words, in equities, they have something called sector leadership, where certain sectors or certain stocks will take off. And then the next thing you know, the major markets and the indexes are following. And you know what? If Bitcoin does stay still, you could have a meme coin aspect to this. You could. Because, even Toby will tell you, when Bitcoin gets boring, they branch out into all this other stuff. So it's easy to get negative on the market when it doesn't move. It is. Especially with, whatever's going on in February. It's easy to do this. But, there are two meme coins. There's I want to say PIP, and there's one with the shark that have reached hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap by altering their tokenomics to limit the number of holders and maximize fee sharing on pump. Who knew? This stuff is out there and it's happening and people are acting like it isn't. People are like, yeah, crypto's dead. Let's talk about silver. Seriously. My machine told me that I had a clip of silver and China. Like China bans silver exports. I'm like, this is trending? I put it on TikTok, 4,000 views. Everyone wants to talk about silver. Now, can silver go to 100? Yes. But it is pretty classic that, everyone's talking about silver and crypto. Monero goes up 20%. Solana, to me, feels perky. Everyone wants to talk about stable coins. Everybody. Solana, just to bring the chart up, it's kind of a battle. But Solana is above the 50-day moving average. When you have these false breakouts, this is what it looks like when you have a false breakout, right? You blast through it and then you crash. And then that's it, right? Every other time you try to get back above it in October, it just fails. This feels a little different to me. It feels like it's just kind of waiting. They call it a bird on a wire getting ready to fly. Solana at 140 with the stablecoin narrative untraded. Untraded. So people packing it in on crypto just because it's going sideways, I don't know how much sense that makes when they've got $2 million targets out there. It doesn't, right? I mean, you have Walmart and Google betting on AI agents shaping how people shop. You have Elon, teasing some sort of crypto connection for X. These guys are going to figure out very quickly, and we've been covering this in the YouTube member area and in Patreon for months. By the way, this stream redirects to the next podcast, where we're looking at what's been moving as a sector message. Everybody is trying to tell you, and because everybody is still wounded from last year, good news is being ignored. And to a certain degree, that's justified. Because every time you got good news last year, everyone was like, "Oh, this is good news." The Twitter would be like, "Oh yeah, publish it, bullish, bullish. Here's BlackRock buys, bullish," and the market just did nothing but go down. So, okay, I understand nobody cares about good news. No one wants to hear it. No one wants to hear good news. And you know what? That is exactly when you want to get involved in crypto. Especially if whatever the next thing is makes people realize how important crypto is for the future. Right? Because eventually, someone has to look at what is going on in gold and silver and realize that gold and silver represent a challenge to the system. In other words, they represent a challenge to centralized exchanges and legacy futures contracts. Silver opening up in China right now, $81. $81. They couldn't push it down. They tried to, and it didn't work. Now, of course, that's what's going to garner attention, not Bitcoin doing nothing. Okay, I get it. But silver at $100 creates fragility in the system. And that is the possible event in February. Whereas when you have eclipses, you have events. It's almost in a way obvious what the events are between silver and the Japanese government bond market. In both cases, you have to ask yourself, once those Magnificent Seven earnings come out, and once maybe everybody realizes either they're priced for perfection or they're disappointed or just now's the time to rotate. Those are hedge fund hotels. Everybody is parked in the Magnificent Seven, and the trade may be elsewhere, and that's where Bitcoin comes in. And these altcoins that are rallying the way they are signals like, hey, even DeFi plays like Pendle, Near is up on the day, and so is TAO. Underestimating, so AI is up, and so is like RWA and lending. It's not up huge, but they're all up. Clearpool, checks, they have Pendle, they have kind of a bid. And I understand that there have been sucker rallies on Sundays. Okay. I get it. There's always a reason why it's no good. But there's also a reason why, just to kind of put this in perspective. I know the guy that's involved in this, Just Dario, who's had the silver story from the beginning. He's had the silver and the Japanese government bond market story from the beginning. So I'd say he knows what he's talking about, and this Clearpool chart is destroyed. Destroyed. And you can see, they gave up on it completely at the start of the year. So, when we look at the coins that we liked at the beginning of the year, right? So, you go to the YouTube member area, you go to the podcasts, and, you can see for yourself. I'm going to put it up right now. This is what we liked when no one liked it. This is January 2nd. Okay. So Bitcoin, Chainlink, Render, Virtuals, which had a massive move, TIA, which makes ETH work better, and for your small coins, Pocket Network. Now, again, crypto's boring, Bitcoin's boring, but a lot of these coins popped off massively, and a lot of them didn't correct. Stacks didn't correct. Render is up again. Underneath the hood, it's called a bottom-up rally. So when a market rallies top down, it's because the big coins or the big indices, a top-down rally is when the big coin or big indices lead. So that's Bitcoin, Solana, XRP, etc. A bottom-up rally starts when all these small instruments start pushing their way higher. And liquidity is coming. I saw a report today on where housing is. So the housing in general, mortgage applications, housing prices, affordability, these things are off their lows. But you have to ask yourself, are rates way too high? Everyone's trying to tell you the Fed propaganda is, well, we can't lower rates because we're afraid of whatever. I think the risk is that, there's too much drag in the economy. There's too much drag either from the tariffs or from the problem that corporations overhired in 2021. They're letting people go because of changes in let's call it social needs to have certain groups inside of your company. And the investment in AI. AI is not replacing workers now, but they're just assuming that they will. So there is zero job growth. And we knew that. But now it's a borderline crisis. It is. And I don't know about you, but I read in the economics textbook that stocks price in whatever is going to be happening 6 months from now. So stocks don't trade what's going on now. They trade the earnings releases that are coming 2 quarters later. So if people suddenly realize that U.S. rates are actually way too high, despite the build out, despite the fact that, no one believes the president when he says this, he probably doesn't lend credibility to the case because he makes it a political issue. But you know what? The guy's probably right. When in crypto do we start pricing in much lower rates? Right? Because that goes along with QE. And I've done, 27 videos on the fact that the Fed's doing QE and I'm not getting anywhere. They're jamming money into the system. And, if you look at Bitcoin, you go to some live TA, in Bitcoin, it could be a bird on a wire getting ready to fly because these DeMark moving averages, right, which again, like the 50-day, Bitcoin has not been able to stay above this thing for quite a while, and this can be construed as Bitcoin can't rally, or this can be construed as a base. The bird on a wire getting ready to fly. Now, I guess if you wake up and Bitcoin's down 5% one day, that's wrong. But when it comes to Solana, let me go to Solana over here. No, you know what I wanted to go to over here? I wanted to go to XRP. Because, if you like Solana, or I should say, if you like XRP, then you also have to like Solana, because you know what? XRP is putting up a fight on a retest of the 50-day moving average. In other words, everyone sold the rally and it's still holding. And what do I say? It's not a bull market until you can buy a dip and make money. ETH is not there yet. ETH is trying to push through the 50-day moving average. ETH is going to get a stable coin catalyst one day. One day ETH will get the stable coin catalyst. And that's when somebody goes, hey, you know what? Maybe it's time to consider what AI agents are going to use when they start trading. Because I'm telling you right now, that is going to happen. And people will probably notice when there's epic volatility in the markets. Like in 87, they blamed what they called program trading. That was the beginning of algos. You're going to have AI agents moving this market around, and people continue to act like that's not happening. And Render is going to wake everybody up and go, you know what? This is happening. It is happening. And I mean, when you look at the news flow, right? If you just look at the news, like there's stuff going on in the Middle East. Everybody's talking about a fight over Greenland. It's like, we're going to be like the Roman Empire. We're going to go take some other country. No, we're not. We already took Venezuela. We're taking all their stuff. That's what we're doing. But the news, there's no crypto news at all. None. The media, just like the general public, is uninterested, right? Like, what are the stories? Like, people have gone to the prediction markets. No one cares about altcoins. I mean, have you heard this? I mean, literally in 2019, I remember, because I'm working for an altcoin firm, a group of ETH maximalists, we all said to each other at one point, maybe there will never be another alt season again. Never mind alt season. There will never be another altcoin rally after the ICO bust, because that was insane. I mean, that was worse than the dot-com bubble. I mean, anything that came out 100x'd. And after that, they said it would never happen. And then DeFi was what came back. DeFi brought it back. In this case, it's AI. I mean, Render is in the portfolio of Multicoin Capital, which is an absolute monster hedge fund here that runs out of Austin. And, I know that Render is trending today, but you know what? Like when you look at Render on like a weekly basis, right? Because I know they restructured the token. So it's not like, oh, there's just a huge amount of history. There's your weekly chart in Render. You have a 13 bottom, then you have a selling climax, you have a 9 bottom. This is essentially a perfect setup. And I mean, I know it's up 15% today, but does this chart look like it's up 15% today? No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And you know what? Most of the market looks like this. And again, I don't think anyone is really appreciating it. And it's funny. This goes to the idea of suppression. So really, all Render has done is unwind the give up trade post October 10th. And I think this is meaningful, right? You had this alligator mouth formation, and Render just breaks out. My old boss from Goldman is in zero hedge a lot. Buy breakouts. Like what stops it? What stopped Zcash? Nothing. I mean, yeah, Zcash had, the Zcash guys. The Zcash became a treasury, like reserve asset for the guys that run Gemini. Okay, but if you look at Monero daily, straight up and down, you know, almost that Jesse Livermore type of formation where it consolidates, it makes an upward sloping range. It's not exact. And I know that everybody uses this. This is like way overused on Twitter. You know, things consolidate in an upward sloping range and then boom. And after Zcash, I can't believe anybody's going to tell me that that can't happen, because it can. Right. And, you know, we talked about what follows. Right. I mean, is the future of money is it from Zcash to Monero? Does Dash and XRP, do the baby Bitcoins get involved? Somewhere in here, people will look at Monero and see the future of money. They will look at silver and see fiat debasement. Like, the reason equities really don't go down, even though everybody is bearish equities, is because, you know, a piece of Apple or a piece of Nvidia is better than $1 in the bank. And no one thinks that's true in crypto. I've heard people say crypto isn't cool anymore. Okay. Crypto isn't cool anymore until you wake up and realize that a decentralized solution perhaps is the only solution going forward with AI and like things. Now, the Zcash chart, just to do some live TA, because I know people like that. You got a lot of support at 326. I really kind of hope it doesn't go down there, but it might. And when you look at like the 4-hour chart on Zcash, you know, you got some pretty serious puking, right? You got a 13 bottom, a 9 bottom, and another 13 bottom. 326 is support, and I'm looking at that as pretty freaking juicy. Somebody says Zcash is a mess. Devs left, and no smart contracts. Here's what I'll say about Zcash, right? Zcash for privacy is not as good as Monero. Zcash pumped, and, you know, it could have been an artificial pump. And somebody here is right. Zcash does not trade well. Zcash trades like it's kind of lost sponsorship. That said, you have to remember, everybody thought Zcash was like Bitcoin of old. It still could be, right? In other words, you know, in Bitcoin of old, you know, Bitcoin would go to 1,000 and then it would go to $10. Now, I don't know if Zcash is going back to $10, but you can have serious volatility. And if you get it in the low 300s, it was at the low 300s in December. Except now I think people are more bearish because, you know, there was bad news about the developers. The fact of the matter is the Zcash network has been upgraded. They can handle more transactions and they continue to upgrade it regardless of who's in charge. That's my opinion. I mean, how can the privacy narrative, how can privacy as a group get to $100 billion from $20 billion without Monero and Zcash participating? That's a good question. I think it is. Okay. You know, if anybody wants to look at silver, the thing that's such a freak show in silver, this is the futures contract, does not take into account today's move. There's no sign of a DeMark top. Like, it's amazing. The DeMark count didn't start until 60. There is no, I mean, you could probably rally. You could have a huge move, 5 more big up days before you have to start, you know, go, okay, well, you know, maybe this is getting a little bit ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could have 2 more up weeks in silver, like the weekly chart's getting a little bit frothy. But when people want to talk about silver and gold and don't want to talk about Ethereum or stable coins, like, you know, how do you look at this Ethereum chart? To me, this feels like some sort of U-shaped entity. And so many people think that whatever goes on in February is automatically negative crypto. Now, of course, if it's negative equities, crypto goes with equities, and we know that. But if you tolerated all this through 2025, I don't see the reason to give up. I don't. Because, you know, there are coins that are popping off that have like major sector themes, right? And if you think about what's going on elsewhere, like, you know, like, do you want to buy a house? Are you ever going to be able to buy a house? You know, what happens if this unemployment crisis, if there is an event in February and this unemployment crisis gets worse? You know, this idea about the Fed and the extent to which Powell has screwed up is beyond what I can even say. Because I think the next Fed press conference, people think he's not going to cut. And I think if he does, he's admitting that there's a problem with the labor market. And it's just that serious. Somebody is asking for TA on TAO. What a great idea. Matter of fact, we could probably go through everything that was on our list. So you have a 9 top at resistance at 306. So I don't know if this is a daily chart. I don't know if that's a top, but it's definitely a pause that refreshes. You know, if you look at a weekly chart of TAO, you have this big 9 bottom here. And this crypto has been in a square range. It has been in a square range for a very long time. And when you're in a square range for a very long time, you can have a serious takeoff. And again, like everything else, you know, I was talking about January. What happens in January can be very indicative of what happens for the rest of the year. That's equities folklore. How are we doing so far in the major AI coin? Do you know what I mean? Grandpa Keeter, a legendary supporter of the channel. This is another thing that was moving. Look at this. Is this even up to date? You got a 9 bottom in Render on a weekly chart. Here was a 9 bottom here in February. It had 3 more down weeks, and then it went straight up. You know, hard to say. It's not a bull market until you can buy a dip and make money. But I am sort of inclined to look at weekly charts. This Bitcoin layer 2, STX, I want to see what that looks like on live TA. Right? Like there's nothing happening in the market, right? Actually, there is. Now, this probably feels a little toppy tactically, but on a weekly basis, I mean, they weren't able to get the 13 bottom out, but it was basically straight down from 90 cents to 30 cents, or actually 25 cents straight down. And if it went straight down, it can go straight back up again. It can. It doesn't. Okay. It doesn't have to be all at once. As a matter of fact, the delay gives you time to get in. Because I guarantee if this was just absolutely ripping, I don't have reply in my database. I'm sorry about that. Sam Storm says, don't do staking. You know, I got news for you about staking. Institutions may start staking. In other words, it's completely logical for institutions to buy something and then want to get yield. They use the options market for this. It's called overwriting or selling covered calls, right? They buy a stock and they sell a bullish bet that's way above it. betting that it'll go up, but not high enough to lose their stock. That's all. And then if the option that they sold expires worthless, it's yield, like staking. Now, of course, you know, you're not putting your stock in some DeFi protocol. I get it. Okay. But you know, when institutions do get involved, that is not priced in either. And VanEck giving you some, you know, wild, crazy price target. It's not about the price target for 2050. It's about they wouldn't be publishing that if they didn't know institutional demand was there and was coming in big way. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the market update. Coming up next, the YouTube member area, where we will be discussing what's next, which altcoins are next. That's coming up in 15 minutes. Members will automatically be redirected. So Grandpa Keeter and all of our friends, let me see if I can shout out the members here. Okay, Yav is here. Meslino, welcome. Odd Dark, a member. Welcome to all our members who actually get special shout outs. And we appreciate you all, particularly staying with us when the market, frankly, sucks. However, it doesn't suck if you're listening to the YouTube member podcast and Patreon. That podcast coming up next. We'll see you in 15 minutes.